So, Gary Breen, good morning.
Good morning.
Ireland 2, Bulgaria 1, or Bulgaria 1, Ireland 2, the two games together. How are you feeling about that? I suppose it's just nice to be able to talk about two Irish wins back to back, but
Oh yeah,
how were you feeling at full time last night?
I was delighted in terms, like you quite rightly said, back-to-back wins. It's been so difficult for this Ireland squad over the years to achieve that. Another away win in the first leg on the back of Heimer getting the one previously. So real positives, and ultimately, I'm looking at this, Dan, and just hoping that this just breeds a little bit more confidence in terms of what's been such a difficult time for this group of players. I know there's some new additions, and they don't carry that baggage with it, and you hope that their energy creates something, but it's a starting point, and I didn't get too carried away with it. I know that you don't want to be playing it down too much, but the quality of the opposition was poor, and we spoke about it so often, Dan, and you've often said this, that it wasn't in Ireland's interest to drop down to Group C, even if there were more winnable games. I just feel for this group's development and for the quality of their play going forward, they need to be against better teams, and that just proved it in terms of how poor Bulgaria were over the two legs.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of aspects, I suppose, to go through from last night. I mean, Ireland conceding first again. Now, I know
Yeah.
like every goal in isolation can be described as a sort of a random event. And yet you do look at it, and it's 7 out of 8 games under Hamer where the opposition have scored first, which just strikes me as concerning. I don't know, what was your read on the goal last night and the
Well,
first half, I suppose, in general, leading around it?
Well, the goal for Bulgaria totally out of nothing, and the concern again is that although it's from a set piece, it's that inability to control the edge of our box. You know, they worked it. They obviously identified there was a weakness there. They played it there, and they scored what looked like a scrappy goal for us. And you think about the quality of their goal in Bulgaria, in and around that 10 area again, scoring. So this is something that needs to be addressed. But you're right, that's not a stat 7 times in 8 games that can continue, and it certainly won't be able to do that against better oppositions because it will find no way back. It's as simple as that. So they need to address that. I don't know whether or not it's concentration levels, which are so important at international level. That's probably the biggest difference between that and Premier League football, is that the concentration levels have to be so on point because the game doesn't really come to you as much as it does in the Premier League. And at times you'll see that, like even with our captain, Nathan Collins, who's got such ability, but his concentration levels can be so loose at times in terms of giving the ball away. And we're going to be punished if he keeps doing it. It's something that needs to be addressed because he's a fabulous player, or has all the hallmarks of being a fabulous player. But we may well debate later on, Dan, in terms of where I actually see his position being in this Ireland team, because I'd like to see us just trying to kind of like look again at him in central midfield, especially the way the team's setting up in terms of a 4-4-2 system. I think if we're going to play that way, I think the importance will be on physicality, having real energy, presence in and around that whole team. And I think him going into central midfield, because of the fact that we do have options now at centre back if everyone is fit, I don't think he'd be a massive loss at centre back where you'd be thinking, oh no, we need him there. I think he could do a really good job in central midfield. I wonder whether or not Hamer will explore that.
Yeah, no, I think let's do that now. I mean, I think we'll talk in a bit about the attacking side of last night and the window, which is definitely, there's some good problems there. But yeah, I mean, Nathan, like the concentration thing, it's sort of it's an interesting one because you kind of wonder at sometimes, is he too confident, but then you want him to be
Yeah.
confident. You look at the goal last night, Evan Ferguson's goal. It's actually a really good pass from Nathan Collins to find Evan Ferguson to start it. So he trusts himself. But Hamer equally said after the first game that they had to speak to him at half time in Bulgaria and say this pitch, this situation isn't made for that. But you feel you can take him out of that central defensive area and you'd be comfortable enough that the options are there to cover him.
Yeah, I genuinely do think, and I think obviously the emergence of O'Brien last night, I thought he had real presence. I know people are probably thinking it's early on to go, but I just feel that he looked comfortable there. I think we've got big centre halves now, not necessarily talking about your Mick McCarthy types who just, big physical presence. I think these guys are big guys, but they're mobile. So I think we can play high up the pitch. And you think about Bamadelli, I know he's got injury problems, and we're always kind of thinking, when's it really going to kick on for him? But O'Shea as well. These guys are really comfortable. I genuinely believe that. And I just feel that I'm not necessarily banging the drum about Nathan Collins being a central midfielder going forward. That's absolutely not the case. I just think that he could be a really good fit within this system, within this team. That's not to say that he can play on the half turn, receive off his fullbacks.
Yeah.
And I know there was a lot of criticism at the time in terms of that performance against England, where people were saying, well, how often did he actually touch the ball? How influential was he? Well, he was without touching the ball. I'm not expecting him to get on the half turn and play through the thirds, but I don't think this team needs to do that. I think a lot of people are thinking I'm going to say just shell it, but it's not about that. It's about playing up, back and through, getting into those wide positions, get the crosses into the box. If you're playing two centre forwards, then ultimately you're wide. And this is a contradiction that I felt I couldn't really understand from the first leg to the second leg, Dan, in that we talked about it, how he wanted to make sure that he had left footers playing on the left, right footers playing on the right, to give you that width to put the crosses in. And in the next game, when we've done so well in terms of exposing how poor the goalkeeper was for Bulgaria, or the centre-backs were with dealing with that type of delivery, he then plays his wingers to play his inverted number 10s in the game last night. And I'm thinking, you think about that game last night, every time Robbie Brady put the ball in the box, it looked like we're going to score. You think about that opportunity early on for Johnson. He had a terrible header. He should really be hitting the target there. Parrott hits the post. Parrott gets a great attack across the front on the cross, heads it just over. And you're thinking, okay, if we've got two big centre forwards in there, let's put the ball in the box. And there were just contradictions there. But anyway, going back to Nathan Collins in central midfield, I just feel that you'd have him as a central midfielder where we play forward, he backs it up. And I just think he gives you that physical presence we just do not have at the moment. As good as and as tenacious as Cullen and Jason Knight are in midfield, if we're going to play a 4-4-2, those two guys are not going to cover the space. They're not big enough. They're not athletic enough to do just that. And I think he may well be an option playing that role. I think he'd be very good at it.
Who or what type of player do you need to put in with Nathan Collins then? If you're talking about Nathan Collins in the middle of a 4-4-2, does that influence the selection of who you partner with him?
Yeah, it probably does to a certain extent. But either of those players I mentioned there, Cullen's the one with his experience. I'd probably be leaning towards him as such, be able to help Nathan through it in terms of recognising. But it's just about identifying where this Ireland team is going to go, Dan, in terms of under Hamer, in terms of those days games starting in September. Now, he talked about he can see the team emerging within his mind in terms of that starting 11. And for me, I'm looking at the system that they're playing. I'm thinking we want strong, powerful lads. Now, the likes of old Benny comes into that thinking, of course he does. I'm thinking about Robbie Brady in terms of saying, well, listen, in terms of having that brilliant quality, do you start him higher up the pitch in a left wing position? Then you may well argue, and I can understand the argument that receiving the ball in a half turn at left wing is a lot harder than stepping in from left back and having the space and time to put those deliveries in. But you'd want those type of balls coming in. But then doing that, these are the questions he's going to have to answer or find answers to, is then, are you kind of letting go as in terms of his quality that he plays? Although I don't really like him in a left side position. I think it's similar to Smodic as well. I want to see those type of guys centrally. I want to see him affecting it. But then if you're playing two centre forwards, how do they get into the team? So these are so many questions that he has to answer in a short space of time. But I do like and feel that the best way forward for this group of players is a really physical presence about them in terms of getting strong, athletic players into that team.
Yeah, because after the first leg and your column at the weekend was very much about Hamer has made Ireland a 4-4-2 side, and I think you're quite happy with that. But was it a strict 4-4-2 last night? Because you're talking about the inverted wingers. At times, it felt like it was almost a back three with Robbie Brady a lot higher. It wasn't it wasn't a rigid 4-4-2. It was definitely a lot more fluid.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think when people say about 4-4-2, it's kind of a throwback to the old days, but there is so much fluid play about it in terms of building up from the back with the three, because the opposition can't close you down, so it's comfortable. So there will be slight adjustments to it. Of course there will be. But I just felt at times last night thinking, we're doing so well with these crosses into the box, then why are you now getting your left wingers to step inside when we can get the ball wide, put balls in? And I was looking at the game last night thinking, how consistent is the message in terms of what Haim is giving to these players, and what are they trying to do? Is he going to make fine adjustments all the time in terms of specific games, which I don't mind at all if the framework is ultimately there. But I don't know. I'm looking at him thinking, this far into his tenure, I thought it would be a lot clearer in terms of where we will be come September.
Yeah, I think he's used over 30 players at this stage, and he was talking about consistency of selection, and I kind of wonder, he seems to have this view that there's not a huge amount between a lot of this Ireland squad, that he feels a lot of them are at a similar level and they're interchangeable. But I don't know, you've been through successful campaigns before. Is there a point where you just need consistency? You just need to know what your 12 to 14 players are going to be?
Yeah, that's really interesting because obviously in terms of consistency, in terms of the play and how you're trying to do, but in terms of personnel, normally over a campaign, it's such a long time that, you know, you're going to have injuries, certain players are going to be out of form, whatever. But this is a short campaign again, those qualify September, October, November. So it's ultimately who's fit. But in keeping with that, Dan, I do think this absolutely applies to our Ireland squad. And Hamer may well be saying is that we said, even Adamida comes on last night and he does that kind of shush sign, and he's talked about after the game about being disappointed not to start. I think they need to change that mentality. I think that because of the way we're playing and the fact that the energy levels are going to have to be maintained and be so high for us to compete at the highest level, that I don't think that there will be a starting 11 that sees out games. I think there'll be a lot of times where these players have to come in, the changes, the subs will be made. And I think he has to change the mindset of them players. And I think at times in the Premier League and lads playing domestically, they understand that. You have players now who come on who are closers. You're going to be, your role will be at the start of this game. I'm telling you now, before it even starts, you'll be on it with 20 minutes to go to do this and to do that. And this is the way the game's going to go. And I think these players need to learn that. I don't think they have to have that massive disappointment about not having a place in the starting 11, because I just feel that the whole squad will have to be used. And Adam Eden may well say you came on, he proved the point. Yeah, that's great. But don't really be that disappointed that you haven't started. Just be ready to come on and influence it in the way you have. And I think that is the way forward for this group.
Yeah. And I suppose you do have to do, like, all the games now are like 2 games in 4 days, which is different, that they've narrowed it over the years. But equally, just to contradict your point, I'm now going to ask you about the starting 11 going forward, because it is like, for me, one of the questions coming out last night was, and you've sort of alluded to it there, you know, you're happier with Finn Azaz in that central position as opposed to off the left. But you listen to Hamer and the way he's speaking about the way he wants his team to play, and it seems like he wants to have a Troy Parrott or maybe an Adamida, a sort of a striker who stretches the defence. Yeah. So is there a question mark then about Azaz and Ferguson on the pitch together?
Yeah, no, there absolutely is, because you see the kind of quality that Evan gives you for that goal. I mean, it was brilliant, but at times I was watching last night and thinking the 2 centre forwards, even however they tried to dovetail it about Parrott being the point and pressing and Evan dropping in, it did at times feel a bit, it didn't feel that fluid about it in terms of them linking up. And we often said this before, didn't we, when we've seen 2 centre forwards playing in previous campaigns, that they were just too far apart. They weren't working as a partnership. But no, you're right. In terms of creating space and stuff, Hamer may well argue that Azaz being able to come in from that left-hand side and come infield does create the space then for Brady from deep to come forward and make those crosses. It enables Azaz to make passes, to be influential centrally. But I don't know, I just looked at it and thought, listen, there's still a lot of work to be done. I understand that. And his emergence has been great, Azaz, in terms of the quality that he brings from club form. And of course, Parrott getting a nod as well is massive for his confidence on the back of what he's doing at RZ. But I don't know, I just looked at it and I just think I'm not convinced by anything in terms of what I've actually seen and thinking that's nailed down. I still think there's so much work to be done.
Yeah. What have you made of Parrott?
Yeah, I've been delighted. I've often said to you, Dan, in terms of when you're playing regular football, everything just seems to be instinctive in terms of just trying to force it. And I think you can see that. I think in terms of him attacking and closing down, the energy he provides, I think that's important. I love the fact that he attacked early with that header that just went over the bar. I love that type of thing. And I'm looking at it now and thinking, well, Adamida thinks he should be in the team. Evan Ferguson, of course, hasn't worked out with him at West Ham, but you hope it will. And ultimately, I don't ever look at Evan and think the troubles he's having is a lack of ability. That's never the case. I just don't think he's been healthy and stayed fit, and hopefully he can do, and then he'll show his quality. So there are options there, but I do really believe it will be a job share as opposed to someone nailing down that starting position.
Yeah, because you have made the point, and you've made it a couple of times there, within the 4-4-2, you need physical presence. Like, you need energy. And you sort of feel like when Ogbene comes back, that he's someone that against like slightly stronger teams, he's going to be valuable. But it does raise questions about the balance in other areas of the team.
Yeah, no, it does. And straight away, my immediate thought would be I'd pick my out-and-out defenders in that back four, even if it's a case of centre-backs playing, whether it's O'Shea or O'Brien at full-back. And I know people say that Doherty's done well, and yet, listen, and again, it would be a case of a job share. I don't even think now that back fours stay on the whole 90 minutes. Certainly, you're seeing loads of teams changing defenders, even in a way that you never saw in our kind of generation. But I'll be looking at those strong defenders in those positions, and you can mix them up how you want with it. The likes of Scales as well, Omobamidele, O'Shea, O'Brien, and I would be looking to push Nathan into midfield. Whether or not they've got enough time to fine tune that, I'm not sure. Then you're looking at people who can deliver balls into the box, because ultimately the reason I'm going back to this type of system in terms of, and everyone's saying, oh, that's so typical of an Irish team historically. It's not necessarily that. The reason I'm looking at it, Dan, and I've said this to you before, is that I genuinely think there's a generation of footballers now that we've come through that just can't defend against crosses. They can't deal with robust centre forwards and balls up to them and dealing with second balls. So I think we could do that, get the ball forward into early areas. Now, some of the best teams in the Premier League are doing that now. We said this about Iriala's Bournemouth. Get those ball into that final third and then let your players play, make it difficult for the defenders. And we're seeing top class or players who would build as top class defenders like Diaz at City really struggling. He's been unrecognisable in terms of dealing with early balls like that. And I think there'll be a lot of international teams who will be like that as well. And I wonder whether or not, if we fine-tuned it, got it working really well, I believe it could bring a bit of joy for us.
I kind of wonder, though, are Ireland susceptible to that too? In terms of, you talk about how players have been coached and brought up, that like this whole line about, we need to make Ireland horrible to play against, and this was sort of... They're not at all. They're not remotely hard to play against. Yeah.
No, they're not. They're absolutely not horrible to play against, and that's the problem. And so often over the last couple of seasons, we said we referenced the players saying we're really enjoying this playing through the thirds, and we'd often counter that by going, yeah, but the opposition are really enjoying you playing through the thirds because you're not particularly good at it. But still, I still think that physical presence, and it's not a throwback to kind of like what Shane Duffy gave us, which was great. But O'Brien suddenly last night, I looked at him and thought, you're going to influence this squad in a way that Shane did when he initially come into that squad in around the Euro 16 time in terms of his physical presence, such a threat in the box. And if you add to that with those centre backs as well, crosses coming in, set pieces, listen, you got Arsenal getting to the top of the Premier League or trying to get to the top of the Premier League. So it's not a case of being like embarrassed about having to play that well. The reason teams are doing it is because the opposition can't deal with it.
So you're feeling optimistic generally then? I mean, we look to the year ahead now. There's Senegal and Luxembourg in the summer. It's sort of a quirky double header. We now know it's going to be Portugal as the top seeds, but September is, for people just to get it into their mind, because it is such a short campaign. There's Hungary in Dublin on a Saturday and Armenia away on a Tuesday, almost like two type of scenario games where we've struggled in recent years. I mean, are you feeling good about that?
In terms of how the fixtures have been given their date in the footballing calendar, yes, I am actually, because I always feel that that's our best time of playing football, September, October, November, not the summer games. We've seen how difficult they are. I've played them, and they are tough. I know we've got some of our iconic greatest ever wins, like you think about Holland at home in the summer, but they're difficult. They're difficult games to play in, and I think in October, November we'll be really fit, and I think we'll be ready to go. And it's just whether or not our main players or whoever, our most influential players, are fit and healthy, and that squad's ready to go. And that would be such a quick turnaround, those games. And the worry, like you said there, Dan, is how it has often been before, is that our campaign has been over before it's barely begun. And that's why that Hungary game just stands out so much in terms of those first two games of that campaign. Yeah,
I mean, Portugal, look, often in international football, we can be wrapped up in our own team and we're not paying maybe a huge amount of attention to other games. I know you would have worked on punditry in a certain amount of them, but look, I still was watching the scores last night, hoping it was Denmark. You just naturally have this feeling that the Scandinavian sort of Nordic teams, I feel like, they're not as intimidating as Portugal might be, but I mean, see, Ronaldo missed the penalty, he's still going strong. But then you look at the other squad list and the players, you're thinking, okay. I mean, I like it's stating the obvious to say it's probably not it's not the result we wanted maybe last night.
No, and at times it was like looking really healthy for us, wasn't it? In terms of having that to play out that way. And Denmark, listen, in terms of playing against them, it wouldn't be easy by any stretch of the imagination. But you do think about Portugal and some of the quality players that they do have, and you're thinking, wow, we like. But listen, if you want to get to the World Cup, you've got to be playing in these type of games, and that's it would be electric in terms of playing against Portugal, but it'd be a real challenge.
Yeah. You enjoy listening to Hamer, don't you, in terms of his press stuff? Like even listening to you there, he did come out afterwards. He actually didn't do the main press conference with the journalists. He just did TV, but like his general tone was, I can almost hear it in what you were saying. He was saying that they made things too hard for themselves at times in the first half. Now, I know you feel that maybe there was elements of the selection influenced that, but he was saying needed to get the ball into the box quicker. That was his line. His messaging after still seems to be quite good.
Yeah, no, I've been really impressed with him in terms of how quickly he's able to identify what worked well, what didn't, and he's quite honest with it. There's no spin in terms of that. And I think at times it's difficult because within the kind of a storm of a game and you're watching it, you can't really reflect. And he often says he doesn't like to, well, he does say he doesn't like to talk to the players until he's reviewed the game back himself. He doesn't want to do it immediately because he wants to make sure that whatever points he's making are legitimate ones. And I think he's quite good at that. I still think this, Dan, and I know I'm not sure you're that bothered by it. I still don't understand why he's not doing the press conferences before. I think we're hearing too much from John O'Shea now. Listen, you know how much respect I've got for John as a player and as a person. He's top class. But it's not about hearing about what he has got to say. What has been interesting and what has been very noticeable is just how influential Paddy McCarthy is in terms of talking to Jaime on the bench and how he's getting things. And you're seeing that he's thinking or telling the manager, listen, this is happening. I wouldn't mind hearing from him a bit more. We've heard from John. We don't need to hear any more on him. And I'm amazed why his bosses, Jaime's bosses, doesn't make him do those presses. I don't understand why we're not getting to hear from him because we need to know. We need to know exactly what he's thinking. He'll argue, like he said, that he's worried about saying something that's clumsy. And you can argue that he certainly said that about the League of Ireland and players having to potentially leave the league to get international recognition. So maybe that's why he doesn't want to do it. But when he does speak, he's clear. And I think he's really good.
Yeah, no, he handles all that stuff quite well. It is interesting you mentioned that about Paddy McCarthy because I'm not sure it would have come across on the TV, but in the first half in Plovdiv on Thursday, like McCarthy and Hallgrimsson were having a lengthy, like a 3-4 minute discussion. And I think they're working off I don't know, was it an iPad or a sheet or something? And it was an animated conversation, just pointing and I've heard this myself sort of separately from people that like McCarthy is viewed as a very modern, progressive coach. He's working at a Premier League club. Yeah. It feels like his influence isn't spoken about enough, but it seems like it is a strong one.
Oh, absolutely. Now, and I know about his reputation as a really good coach at Palace and that, and highly thought of. And I was delighted that he was retained as well. And you're right. Those type of guys, you can't underestimate just how influential they are. Now, listen, it's not a case of him having to sit in front of the camera and explain everything he's doing with the squad for our benefit. But nevertheless, it's quite obvious just how important his opinion is in terms of with the players, but notably with the manager. And I think that's good. I think you need that kind of strong presence on the training ground. Definitely, I think it's something that he's learned and he's honed his craft, and we're getting the benefit of it. Yeah.
Well, look, Gary, it still is pleasant, I think, not to be in full post-mortem mode at the end of a window. I mean, we can, for all the sort of quibbles about the quality of the opposition, there is something refreshing about not being in that total what went wrong mode.
Yeah, no, of course it is. And listen, for us, it's great. But can you imagine, Dan, what it is for the players? Because how many times, I'll never question their kind of desire and how many times they just pick themselves off the floor and go again. So for them to just have the experience of winning the game for Ireland and being able to do it. Now, listen, playoffs, I said this to you before, are usually a reflection of maybe you've come up a little bit short or you've done great to make the playoffs. This was a playoff ultimately was based on us failing in our group. And we got a good chance on the back of it to build a little bit of confidence with the opportunity of this two-legged game against Bulgaria. And they did it. They did just that. Two come from behind wins, which you can never underestimate. You know, that's a great feeling for them to have done that. They will know, and they've seen it so many times, they've got a lot of work to do, but they must be delighted that they've actually won this playoff comfortably, and they absolutely did.
Yeah, no, it is nice for everyone just to bask in the afterglow of 2 wins. Unfortunately, I'm now going to leave the show. This positivity is short-lived. We've got Mark Canham's first press conference in a number of months at lunchtime today. So I do have a feeling across the rest of the week there might be some headlines coming out that it may not be as rosy as the picture portrayed by the 2 wins.
Have you got the good questions ready, Dan?
I think there's a lot of people going to this event today with questions. So I think it's something for people to look at. I'm sure it'll be discussed on the show across the week. But Gary, again, thanks as ever for joining us. I know you're going to have a column in the Independent on Wednesday, I think,